Good afternoon. I'm Jenny Chapman, Dean of the Haas School of Business. Welcome to today's Dean Speaker Series. We have an incredibly wonderful guest here, Meredith Kopit Levien. Meredith is President and Executive Officer of the New York Times Company. She leads the company's global operations and directs its business strategy. So before becoming CEO in September 2020, Meredith served as the Chief Operating Officer, overseeing all major commercial operations, including subscriptions, advertising, events, and the cross-functional digital product development organization. Prior to being appointed COO in 2017, she was the Executive Vice President and Chief Revenue Officer, a position she held until since 2015. So a long and deep history with the Times. In that role, she was responsible for both the subscription and advertising businesses. Meredith joined the Times Company in 2013 as head of advertising. Before joining the Times, she spent 5 years at Forbes, where she held various roles, including publisher and chief revenue officer, and 6 years at one of my favorite magazines, The Atlantic. She began her career at the Advisory Board Company. Meredith is a Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute. She serves on the board of directors of the New York Times Company and Instacart. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Virginia in 1993, and she divides her time between New York and Washington, D.C. Meredith, we are so incredibly grateful to welcome you here to Haas.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I've told everybody I'm on a big recruiting trip to get more smart, committed, business-minded people to work in journalism.
Yeah, they're right here. They're right here. Good, good. So let me give you some quick directions for our Q&A part. So you all notice you have a note card on your seat. If you have questions while the conversation is going on, please jot them down, pass them to the side to Sarah and Carrie. We'll take a look over them, and we have a special guest here today, Dean Bolden from the journalism school here on campus, my colleague. Yay. Dean Bolden is from this world of journalism, and so I invited him over to facilitate the questions, which will make it even more exciting. So I'm really excited you're here. Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to our MBA team, Venkata Gadi and Ima Essien, who are going to have this wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Meredith, it's truly an honor to have you with us today. Hello, everyone. My name is Venkata. I'm an executive MBA student at Haas. On behalf of Dean's team and everyone here, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. And we're excited to learn from your perspective and leading an institution where the product is not just content, but trust and how that translates into economic value. Thank you so much.
It's a privilege to be here.
And hi, everyone. My name is Ima. I'm a second-year full-time MBA student. I'm really happy to facilitate this conversation and learn from probably one of the best to help us navigate transitions in media.
I'm thrilled to be here. Can I do my own housekeeping detail? We're in the presence of greatness. My friend and colleague, who I admire so much, is here, Katie Kingsbury. I just want to point her out. Katie is the I have other amazing friends and colleagues here too, but Katie is the baller and very successful and now pretty tenured opinion editor of the New York Times, and I think she's speaking at the journalism school tonight, or somewhere. She is speaking somewhere later. Anyway, she's here too. I'm going to give the hard questions to you, Katie.
Well, welcome to everyone. Meredith, thank you for being here. We'll just jump right in.
Let's do it.
You've worked in media for most of your career. What's kept you committed to the work?
Oh, that's a fun place to start. Let me say, I always react a little bit to the word media. And I want to say media is a big, wide word. It means a lot of things. I have worked for more than 25 years supporting the business of something specific within media, which is high-quality, original, independent journalism, which is a professional practice. I know Katie will back me up on this. Professional practice for helping people seek the truth and understand the world. So I want to make that distinction up front. What's kept me there? A few things. One, I've been a lifelong lover of serious journalism. I was telling somebody this morning, I remember being 9 years old when the Iran hostage crisis happened, and I was like obsessed with reading the news, watching the news, talking about it, and wondering why all the other 9-year-olds were not doing the same. And so maybe a little piece of advice in here: pick a field where the homework is something you would do if they didn't pay you. And like my homework for the New York Times is I read, watch, and listen to an enormous amount of journalism every day. So that's the first thing. The second reason I've stayed so long doing this kind of work is I also, as a person who from a very young age was kind of worried about the country and the world and cared a lot about its fate and future. And we have a thing we say a lot at the New York Times, which is journalism can't solve the country and the world's problems, but the country and the world's problems cannot be solved without high-quality, serious, independent journalism. And that's because journalism and the thing we do at the core, reporting, is what gives people a shared fact base to make good decisions for themselves and with one another. So, and I'll just say there a little bit of advice. When you have a hard day at work and you go home and you think, and you're going to have hard days. I have hard days all the time. But you think, I am doing this in service to some higher purpose, like all the easier that hard day goes down better. And the last thing I'll say is what's kept me there is I've spent half of my 25 years now, more than that, at the New York Times. So I get to do this work at an institution whose work reaches 50 to 100 million people just on our own sites and apps every single week, and many more beyond that. And I get to I get to see the work have impact. And I also, this is a very like MBA, like a business school message. I get to do that work at I run a public company, but it is a family-controlled public company, and that governance structure has allowed the Times, which exists in a very tough market, to make really good, hard, strategic calls and give them a long time and resources to play out and to be proven right. And there's not much in business that I see that's great that doesn't actually take a long time and a lot of commitment and a lot of resources. So I get to do that at a company that's set up to enable that.
Thank you for sharing.
That's awesome. And building on that, I would like to talk about your transition point as a leader. You've been at Times since 2013 and became the CEO in 2020. And that was also the time when Times is, seeing this transformation from print institution to becoming a digital subscriber business model. Can you share what was the hardest internal belief that you have to change, and not just inside the market, but inside the building? And then could you share how actually you made the shift real?
Yeah. In the market, I'll just say quality journalism was something worth paying for by end users, by other companies. We're still fighting that fight. I think users get it now, but the ecosystem needs to get it too. If somebody isn't paying for it, including the companies that dominate and control the flow of information, if it's not paid for, it's not going to happen. So that's the first thing. Inside the building, maybe a little more kind of fun and interesting to talk about. I've learned this big lesson, which is that every business question at the New York Times, every question about how much can we grow, how fast can we grow, how big is the growth opportunity, really comes back to how much engaged audience can we grow for the work? Every business question is about that. And one of the big beliefs we had to change early on, so early in my tenure there, was when we were mostly a newspaper, the act of doing the journalism, the things that people like Katie did, and the act of finding an audience for that journalism or running a business around that journalism were like such distinct things, and everything was set up to keep them very far apart from one another. In a digital world, those are much more interconnected activities. And so just like convincing people of that, I think a dozen years ago now, we began to establish what is now a really formidable audience development operation in news. Part of getting people comfortable with that was convincing, the world's preeminent journalism team that it's not going to screw up the work. It's not, we're not going to sort of alter the way we would cover something just to get that audience. We're not going to chase a particular audience because that's in vogue or we feel like we don't have enough of those people. We're not going to do clickbait. And I think the way you get belief for that is you prove it. And I think, we've spent a dozen years now proving that we can do hardcore work to build an audience without compromising like an inch of the quality and the independence of the journalism. And in fact, now I think it's well understood amongst the journalists at the New York Times that the more audience we have, the more impact they have for their work, the better the business does, the more we can invest in more journalism. The last thing I'll say, and this I joke that I sort of ran for CEO on a platform of product-driven growth. This is the one that I am probably most responsible for. We sort of figured out early on, like 11 or 12 years ago, that we were competing with the most powerful companies, information companies the world had ever known for engagement. And those companies had that engagement at like billion people plus scale. And for us to get a lot of engagement, we had to be good at the things they were good at. And one of the things I realized when I was the COO of the company was we were trying to get that engagement, but we had this like old organization that was sort of largely tilted to commercial activities, sales, marketing, and pretty siloed and pretty functionally based. And so we literally rebuilt the whole business side of the company to be much more about product-driven growth. And we actually hired a guy from Uber to come sort of teach us how to do objective-based cross-functional work. It was amazing. And now at the time when we started this, we probably had a couple hundred engineers. We now have 1,000 people at the New York Times doing digital product development work. It's the sort of second biggest function. Most people are doing journalism. That's the next biggest function. So learning how to do that, how to make sure the way you find and experience the journalism, it happens at a level of quality that the journalism happens at. That we had to get a lot of belief for that.
That's very insightful. Thank you so much.
Can I say one more thing? I'm going to crib the publisher of the New York Times here and use his two favorite words about what we've had to change: value and values. They both really matter at the Times. We understood early, like for 175 years, we've understood the thing that makes us most valuable is the quality, the originality, the independence of the journalism. So in good times and bad times at the New York Times, we have kept investing in the journalism, and we have done that. We've created that value even when other news organizations were doing less and less of that. And then on values, I just want to say, we are living at a time where so much of media, even to some degree journalism, feels to people swayed, by anger from the left or the right or the administration or corporate interest, or just is built to feed an algorithm so that somebody can grow an audience. And I want to say the Times, at its core, the most important value we have and hold on to is the independence of our journalism. We pursue the truth wherever it may lead, even when that is to places people don't like. And we do that in service to nobody's interest but the public, come what may. Whatever is going to be said about us or done, the New York Times journalism is not going to be cowed. And I think sticking to that understanding of value and being unrelenting in our commitment to those values has really helped the place change and built belief amongst the people who work there.
That's awesome.
Well, that's really helpful to understand because that shift really translated into very visible results with the subscriber base growing to about 12.8 million since you've joined, and also revenue, the digital revenue growing closer from 800 million to probably 2 billion. So when you look at that growth, what actually surprised you most about what it took to make that happen?
Yeah. I'm not going to say things that are terribly surprising. I actually think the thing I just said, like unrelenting, uncompromising commitment to the journalism has a value. That value is to the public. We're going to keep investing in it. And we will not be cowed or pushed by anyone, no matter how pissed off people get and whoever they are. We are going to pursue that truth wherever it leads. So, like doing the journalism without fear and without favor. That is the biggest reason. I'll name a couple other things though that are worth saying to a room full of people getting an MBA. Really clear strategy. One of the things that's been most fun for me at the New York Times, being there 13 years, is to work on a strategy, help shape, and then deliver on a strategy that I think our investors understand, the people who work for us understand, I think even the public understands. And I say to other people about strategy, like if you can't describe it in the simplest terms, then it's not a good strategy. So what is the New York Times strategy? We aim to be essential to curious people everywhere who want to understand the world and make the most of their lives. That's it. And how are we going to do that? 3 ways. 1, we are going to provide the world's best news coverage, be the world's best news destination. 2, we're going to have leading coverage and products in really big lifestyle spaces where people spend a lot of time. And 3, we're going to put those things together in an interconnected experience. So whatever is going on in the world or your world, we're going to be relevant to you every single day. That is the company's strategy. And that strategy, which we've been like articulating now for, let's say, 4 or 5 years, is built on a set of really big kind of hard calls that we made more than a decade ago. And those like big hard calls are still playing out. The obvious one that I think everybody knows, as we said, we were a subscription business first that has paid dividends for years, multi-revenue stream model. But first we do things for subscribers. The other one, we settled on what I call these 4 Ds like 10 years ago, literally. And we are still obsessed with them. We're still talking about them, every week in our executive committee meetings. People have to come to us as a destination. They can't just find us on the internet, but ultimately the best experience on the New York Times has to be with us because, by the way, that is where we actually have a business, and you get the best experience of the journalism there. 2, they have to have a direct relationship with us. 3, we are endeavoring not to be something you do once every so often. We want to be a daily habit. We want to be a daily habit at scale. And 4, the 4th D I say is we need some drive-by audience, but we've got to be deliberate about when those people drive by, we actually turn them into people coming to the destination who have a direct relationship, who use us to have a daily habit. And that sort of strategic clarity has, I think, gotten us very far. I'll name one other thing that I don't think gets talked about enough, which is we've been pretty good at execution. I think execution is like the great undertold story of successful business. And there's one key to that, which is, I think, there's lots of things, but one thing more than anything, we have a team of executives, leaders, and even if you go into the ranks on down, sorry, don't worry. That one's closed and that one's empty. I'm good. I knew I was going to do that. I talk with my hands, and I was like, at what point am I going to throw that by accident? That team of executives has been developed. They've grown up at the Times. We have invested tons of time and energy into how they work together. And that's what execution is all about. It's like, can you get a group of people doing very disparate things, kind of working in harmony to the same objectives? And I think we get better and better at that every year. Doesn't mean we don't bring in new people. Our head of advertising came in from the outside. She's amazing. We spent a lot of time saying to her, this is how our culture works, right? So lots of time and effort, lots of intention around getting talent to stay and work together really well.
Thank you for that.
That's really awesome, the 4 Ds. And at Berkeley, we have the 4 defining leadership principles that are actually inscribed on the walls as well as our hearts. Yeah. Meredith, you talked about creating the value and how it comes from uncompromising product and not just treating journalism as a loss leader. That's great. And I would love to go deeper, a bit layer into what actually drives that value for the users. Nowadays there is a lot more content, and what actually creates a real habit, than just being than someone just scrolling past. And how much of that is driven by the content itself versus a product strategy like bundling, notifications, or even daily rituals?
These are things we think about all the time. Let me push. You asked about content. Let me say two things about the sort of framing of the question. One is content is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. We can all get it 24/7. Quality information obtained through a professional process to make sure that information is uncompromised by anything other than like truth or value or joy or what it's meant to do, that is really rare. That is probably more rare and more valuable than it's ever been. So that's the first thing I want to say. And on a list of like 10 things to get people to have a habit, I think 1 through 7 or 8 is the information worthy of coming to and coming back to every single day or really often. So that's the first thing to say. And the Times has a number of properties that people come at millions scale every day or most days a week. We have the internet's largest morning newsletter. It's called The Morning. Millions of people listen to The Daily every day. Millions of people play our biggest games. Raise your hand if you play. Exactly. And, millions of people go to our app or our homepage every day. And what do those things have in common? Really high quality. These are brands. And what is a brand? The Times parent brand, or even like a franchise brand like The Morning or The Daily or Wordle. It is the promise that the thing you're going to get the next day is just as good. It's going to be different, but it's going to be just as good. And I think that is plays a really big role in habit. And I have to imagine some of you are going to go work in digital product. I think too, 9 and 10 on that list is the experience by which you take it in. Is it elegant? Is it efficient? Does it honor your time? Like Wordle totally honors your time. Sometimes Connections doesn't, but that's a different story. But so I think those are the keys. And then I'll just say you're asking is it the content? Is it the stuff that goes in it? We try really hard to think about those things holistically. And I'll say one other thing. Our strategy at the Times, which a lot of people will call the bundle strategy, is about, can we get you to come for one thing and then do something else? And that plays a really big role in habit. And we know it used to be, before we had these other products, it was like, if we could get you to read in one more topic in news, you were more likely to stay and come back. Now, if we can get you to use more than one product, you're much more likely to stay, pay, do all those virtuous things. And we just launched a family plan. If we can get you to do it with the people you love, you're that much more likely to have a habit.
Yeah, so even in this product-driven environment, I want to circle back to the fact that you said journalism is still a core value, but what you're really describing is more closer to a tech subscription model, as you've named. So how do you think about this tension between being a journalism company still and being also a consumer subscription platform?
Yeah, no tension at all. And I'll say that 2 ways. One, the promise of fact-based, independent, high-quality news journalism, and news is a really big term, like media is a really big term, means a lot of things every single day. That is the first reason that the Times is a successful business. So I just want to say no tension. There's nothing quite like news and the promise of how it is going to be delivered with quality and rigor and independence to drive the business. So it's the most value creating thing we do, obviously for society, but also economically. So no tension. We have an expression inside the Times. For a solar system, news is the sun. It's like the thing that imbues everything else with a life-giving force. Now, those planets, Earth has a lot of value. Those planets also have enormous value. And we want to make each of the planets in the solar system the biggest, best version that it can be. The Athletic, we want it to be the #1 place for sports journalism on Earth. By the way, it has a running start. We have the largest journalism, the largest newsroom by 550 journalists by miles, just covering sports on the planet. So running start. We want games to be as big as they could be, and I would say that sort of all the way across the bundle. I'm going to say one more thing to your point, like, is it a tech construct? I do think often a bundle is just like a marketing or a merchandising construct. Buy this thing, and you also get this thing and maybe this thing. That's not what the Times is doing. We've got this idea that when you wake up in the morning, when you get on your commute, when you're in the elevator going up to the office, at lunch, at the end of the day, when you're winding down, there's something for you in some part of the portfolio. It's a cohesive idea that sort of all hangs together. When we bought The Athletic, I was getting PR advice, and the PR consultant said to me, sports and news like peanut butter and chocolate. People always assumed that it was good done together. And I would say that the whole bundle is a cohesive thing. And the last thing I'll say, when people think like tech invented the bundle, at the peak of newspapers, which was probably 50 years ago, 60 million American households got a newspaper. They didn't all get the Times, but they got a newspaper. And that newspaper came into the house with news and recipes and shopping advice and things to play or to make you laugh. So, like, I just reject the idea that we haven't always been doing it. We're just doing it at digital scale now.
Yeah, that's true. Can't deny. And Meredith, while subscriptions are at the core, you also evolved how Times approached advertising in a more deliberate and structured way. Your digital advertising continues to grow, even there is turbulence in the broader ad market.
Grew a lot last year.
Yep, and legacy media companies have historically been at the mercy of these market dynamics, right? So what's structurally different about how Times approaches marketing, advertising marketing today versus 10 years ago?
Why is the ad business better? And let me just say, anyone in the ad business, anyone, is subject to the dynamics of the ecosystem and the macroeconomy and everything else. I love to talk about the ad business because it is run so much better and it is so much more successful now that somebody else is running it than when I ran it. Our ad leadership team is doing a great job. The most ironic thing, it's so obvious now, it felt sort of crazy then, is the big unlock to our ad business was saying we're a subscription business first, which we did 11 years ago. What does that mean? It means that you make products for consumers and you need tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of people to engage with you. And that's, you build everything to get that enormous engagement, right? And, the sort of assertive time strategy now to be essential for curious people everywhere means we want to mean more to more people, and we want to do that at great scale. Guess what? We also mean more to more advertisers. Why? One, we're in giant spaces, news broadly defined, and sports, and recipes, and shopping advice, and games, where so many people spend time. Two, we have incredible brands in those spaces. Some are newer, right? But they're incredible brands, and they're brands that marketers are delighted to be associated with. And we have enormous engagement, and we also have a huge registered user base. So we've been building for years now. I'm going to use a kind of technical jargony term, but we've been building what's called first-party data, like our own data to help. And we have so much signal. Think about it. You go to the Times for so many needs in your life. We have so much signal that we can use in privacy-forward ways. So all that just makes a much better proposition for marketers. I'm going to say one other thing. We don't have that many ads on a page because we care a lot about the consumer experience. So the ads we do have really work. Marketers come back again and again. And what has happened, the structural difference is when I came to run the ad business 13 years ago, even at the Times, which was a big publisher, that was like a niche idea to a marketer relative to television, relative to platforms. We're like not niche anymore. We're not Meta. We're not TikTok, of course not. We're not Google, but we are playing like up a level in terms of what marketers consider, and I think we're a must-buy for a lot more.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also hearing that the model is so much more sophisticated now, I want to zoom out a bit and ask, so media today is incredibly fragmented. We have individual creators and new Substacks that keep emerging, and some openly question whether traditional media is over.
I've never heard that. I gave a whole speech last year where I walked out on the stage at the Times and said, traditional media is dead. Like, we hear it every single day, which is like such a ridiculous idea, but carry on. Carry on. A lot of people do think it. You're not ridiculous. It's the right question. A lot of people think it.
But I guess we will then inquire, where do you see the broader media ecosystem going, and how does the importance of independent journalism endure within that?
Yeah. Here's what I see, and bear with me, because I think there are a few things going on. One, we are living at a time, to your point about podcasts and Substacks and videos and social media, we are living at a time where there is an abundance of takes and less original reporting. So that is just the first thing to say. And those takes serve a purpose. They're entertaining. There's lots of good coming out of them, but that is not a substitute for reporting and high-quality independent journalism. That's the first thing to say. We are living at a time when, over the last 25 years or 20 years, something like 3/4 of all the newspaper journalists in America lost their jobs. What does that mean? It means people run into high-quality independent journalism at like the level of relevance of their daily lives far less than they used to. We are living at a time, it used to be that institutions sort of mutually reinforced the importance of independent journalism, and we are living at a time when now there are a number of institutions that are doing the opposite. They are trying to discredit independent reporting and journalism for its own purpose. And maybe the biggest one, we're living in a time where most people's media diets have some or a lot fed to them by algorithms. And what is that algorithm designed to do? It is designed to match email whatever you already think and love and know. It wants to give you more and more of that. And independent journalism exists to like do the opposite of that, to broaden your mind. So that's the first thing. I want to say, all those things you mentioned, lots of it has a lot of value. A lot of it also still requires there to be big institutional journalism organizations that are putting reporters in places. And there's not a lot of reporting. There's some reporting, but a lot of what you described is not grounded in reporting. The New York Times has had people on the ground, many people in Ukraine for 4+ years, for every bit before the war started, still now. We've got people on the ground in the Middle East. We've got people where we've had people in Sudan. Most people don't even know that there is a brutal war in Sudan. And A, the public needs that kind of institutional journalism, and B, a lot of the takes even need it. A lot of the takes need it. And so you've got people getting their information from Instagram or TikTok or a chatbot. All those things still need somebody to go out and unearth new facts in the world and do that in an uncompromised way. And so I'll close on that by saying the world, like, unquestionably needs more independent journalism, and independent journalism needs more from the world. It needs institutions to not discredit the work. It needs like press freedom and the chance for journalists to do their work in an unfettered way. It needs an ecosystem where the shapers of the ecosystem can help people recognize high quality work and where they themselves give fair value exchange for it. And it needs a public that understands the difference between all these things. So we're working on all those things, but it is hard.
That's incredible. And thank you for sharing. And you mentioned about the algorithm, right? I want to shift to now the AI is being talked about a lot, and it's shaping how...
I don't get to talk about AI very much.
It's shaping not just how information is accessed, but also like how is it interpreted, and which is actually raising broader questions about values and judgment and all of that, right? So from your perspective, where do you see AI improving the experience of the reader? And where do you think the human judgment is still playing a bigger role than ever?
Yeah. Really good question. Big picture, Times 175 years old. You know, we're at a, I think, higher point of value today than we've ever been. You don't get there if you are not absolutely willing to harness whatever new technology comes along and say, how do we do more and better journalism, and how do we actually do the work more efficiently so that we can do more and better journalism, and how do we make it more accessible to people. So let's just take that as a given. And there are already ways that we are doing that. You can listen to most text articles from the New York Times now in what is the third generation of an automated voice. We have done translation experiments. Those I'll say the tech is not quite there yet to allow that to really scale, but it will be eventually. We use it in some careful ways in the journalism. The Epstein files dropped on I think Friday afternoon, 3.5 million pages of materials. Our AI initiatives team in the newsroom immediately built a tool set for reporters and editors to comb the work and say, what are the big stories here that the public kind of quickly needs to know about? And then with the judgment of reporters and editors, they were able to go in and find things from that. And my favorite example, we used AI to comb through aerial photography. This is a big one. You ready? To understand just how big pickleball is in the United States, how many tennis courts had become pickleball courts. So, I mean, we're using it. Now, that said, 2.5 years in, we are obviously very publicly and assiduously enforcing our intellectual property rights. Happy to talk about that. But I want to tell you that I have even more conviction 2.5 years in that the core of what we do, which is expert reporters who are trained in a professional practice, working with expert editors equally trained, going out into the world, often where very difficult things are happening, LA for the fires, a war zone, places where terrible, a school shooting, and unearthing important information, and then with humanity and sensitivity and judgment, translating that into understanding for people. And the need for that is not going to be replaced, wholesale by an AI. You can imagine we're going to use AI to do all the things that let us do more and more of that, but the need for that is not going away, and it will always be human-led at the time.
Thank you. And so thank you for sharing it, because we know it's also a huge responsibility. I want to quickly just lean into advice you would give our students who would like to work at the intersection of media, tech, and business. What would you focus on building early, especially since 11 years ago, you and your executive team had so much foresight to put in place?
Like advice for each of these as individuals?
Where to spend their energy.
Let me do the boring one first, but I always say if I ever wrote a book, it will be outwork everyone else and good things will happen. There's just and I think every executive will say this to you, there is no substitute for being someone who's just willing to do the work, willing to do the hard work. And I will give a nuance to that maybe doesn't get said enough, which is the earlier, it's a little bit like investing, like the earlier you stash away the money, the bigger the pot is at the end. The earlier you demonstrate yourself to be someone who is willing to do whatever it takes, your life is only going to get more complicated. You may get a partner and children and have aging parents and all kinds of crazy things. So making the investment of the hard work very early, I can't say enough about that. That's one. Two, I worked for a boss who used to say people need to have the force of ideas. And that just always struck me. You're going to want to be able to do, sort of have original ideas about how things should go. They may be ideas about strategy. I tend to be someone who is better at that than I am at other things. I'm never the person with the creative idea, but I'm good at seeing strategy. If you can have original ideas and or create the conditions for other people to produce original ideas, you will always have work. And the last one I'll say, because you guys are all, you're in an MBA, many of you are MBA students, the more you can sort of obsess about what is the person above me worried about and what are they worried about? And how high can I climb to really understand the value of solving this problem and the context for solving this problem? The more you can inhabit that, I think the better you go.
That's very insightful. Thank you for sharing. And I would love to end the conversation on a personal note, Meredith, and we're asking this question to all the Dean Speaker Series guests this academic year, which is, if you had one extra week in your life right now with no responsibilities or obligations, what would you do with that time and why?
I will say I'd probably come to California. I love California. We can do a whole other session on that. The first thing I would do, I have like the love of my life is my almost 15-year-old son, JJ, who's amazing. The first thing I would do is I would take his phone and I would throw it into a bonfire. Never to be used again. And then we would go away, maybe Tahoe, maybe Jackson Hole, somewhere with mountains and water and with, we have a lot of close family friends. We roll with a lot of other families where there's people of all ages. And we would spend many hours a day running, biking, hiking, whitewater rafting, doing those things. And then in the moments when we weren't doing those things together and playing family games, we'd be reading and watching and listening to a lot of journalism. So that's what I would do.
Thank you so much.
You run a company that does a lot on a phone. I don't hate phones. I just hate the phone in the hands of my almost 15-year-old.
Great. So thank you all. Now we'll have some questions from the audience. And Meredith, this first question is one that really resonates with me. I used to be an editor at the Washington Post. We know that in the digital era, there seems to be pressure for faster journalism. How do you balance truth-seeking journalism with this pressure? And sometimes, I know when we wanted to beat the New York Times, right? That was one of the goals. We wanted to be right, but we wanted to beat the New York Times. So how do you balance the speed with accurate journalism?
Yeah. Let's see. Katie runs Opinion, which is like not quite as fast pitch as news, but let's see what she thinks of my answer. I think... besides independence, the next most important thing, particularly for reporting on things that are unfolding in real time, is accuracy. The whole process is designed to keep the compromises out because human beings are doing it. That's the professional practice. But accuracy really matters. And I would just say it's more important to be accurate than fast. And first, of course, we also want to have it first, but the accuracy piece kind of matters more. I'm going to say one other thing that doesn't get said enough about journalism. Reporting particularly is like a moving, you know this, Katie knows this, it's a moving thing. So often people will say, oh my God, you didn't get the story right. If we published it, occasionally we get it wrong and the mistakes are very painful. We do our best to own them and to learn from them when they happen. But most of the time, it's because the reporting, we could only validate that which we're telling you. And there's another day of reporting after that. I tell people, don't judge us for a headline or a single story on a fast-moving, multi-day story. Judge us for the whole body of work. And usually, if you zoom the camera out and you look at the body of work, way more often than not in 175 years, the Times got it right.
So I'm going to ask you to sort of go inside process for us a little bit here. Most of the people in the room have probably never worked in newsrooms like you and I have. So when those errors happen, when things arise, how do you handle those incidents? What's the process for that?
Yeah. The shortest way I can describe it, your friend, your board member, the former executive editor of the New York Times, Dean Baquet, who you can't work at the Times, not worship. Dean Baquet always has the answer to almost every problem or question about journalism. Katie, do you know what I'm going to say? It's more journalism. You keep reporting. So when there is something where we are called into question, where our own reporting is called into question, we keep reporting. And sometimes we re-report it. I won't tell you which, but there was a very important story about a very, very difficult, very sensitive topic that a number of sources, some of which really gave us pause, said that is not the story. And we went out and re-reported that story. You know, you re-talk to the sources. So again, I want to say we are not mistake-free. We are not error-free. Mistakes are really painful. They should be really painful. Journalism, when it's good, has real impact. And I'm going to add, there is no thing that gets published at the New York Times without multiple professional journalists looking at it, examining it. And the more hard and sensitive and sort of disputable the topic, the more of that judgment is applied.
Well, so a great follow-up to that then is, how do you face moments of crisis? For example, when you've reported something that's deeply researched and that you know is truthful, and a president, for example, files a lawsuit against you.
The New York Times is not going to be cowed. I tried to say that in answer to one of your questions. It's the thing that makes me proudest to work there, proudest to tell everyone buy a subscription. And by the way, the Washington Post reporting, as far as I can tell, doesn't appear to be cowed. We were chatting about that before. The Wall Street Journal does not appear to be cowed. Independent journalism, truly independent journalism, we have the benefit of an ownership structure. We've got no other corporate interests. We're like in this first for the public, and that goes all the way up to governance. We're not going to be cowed. And a lot of the work, I want to say this, a lot of the work to discredit our journalism, the point is so that you don't pay attention to the journalism, so that to chill further reporting. And so if we pulled our punches, if we said, you know, we're just not going to pursue that topic anymore, how would we be serving the American or the global public?
Oh, terrific. And
feel that way, walk out of this room and buy a subscription, not necessarily to the Times, to any organization. Buy a subscription to the Journal, buy a subscription to any organization, your local newspaper, what's a Cal Matters, I don't even know if they have subscriptions, but it's awesome. Anyone doing high quality independent journalism, support it.
yeah, so as a follow-up to that, you know, you've been incredibly successful at making the Times a digital powerhouse. First paper I pick up, even though I'm a Washington Post editor, the first thing I read every day is the New York Times. Well, in truth, the first thing I do is that I play Wordle, and then I do the spelling bee, and then I read the Times.
You and everybody else.
But as a former newspaper editor, I worry that journalistic excellence has always been a team sport with robust competition. If the current market trend continues to trend toward a winner-take-most reality where the Times has no true peers left, how do you prevent the institution from becoming either a complacent monopoly or a single point of failure for American democracy?
It's a great question. I want to just reject the notion with full force that the Times has the kind of power you're sort of poking at. We have close to 13 million publicly reported subscribers. We believe, and I think there's lots of credible evidence to suggest, the audience for digital news is in the hundreds of millions of people. And even if you cut that down to willingness to pay, we have a relatively small percentage of those people. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is I and we, the New York Times, unequivocally believe it is way better to have many formidable institutions of journalism slogging it out with us every day. That period when Bezos had just bought the Washington Post and Marty Barron was the editor, and it was amazing. The sort of level of competition, it was incredible. The sort of you play your best tennis when you're playing with other great players. And I just want to say the country needs more journalism and we need more journalism. And the Times is doing a lot to support other outlets of journalism. We have a fellowship program where we train journalists and send them out into the diaspora of journalism. We have a particular separate from that, we have an investigations fellowship that we fund. It's led by that executive editor who I mentioned, Dean Baquet. We just helped fund something called Deep South Today, where in places like Mississippi, places that are otherwise journalism deserts or close to it, we are helping there be more investigative reporting. But I want to say to you, we need an ecosystem with a lot of that happening. And there are some promising things, but there's not enough of it. And related, people don't think it's the same thing. Press freedom, this country has enjoyed 50 years of bipartisan support for press freedom. Press freedom on the surface seems like it's for journalists. It's for the public. It's to protect the public's right to know things. And I wish you should leave this room and go talk about press freedom. Go talk about what's happening to protect your right to know. This is a room full of MBAs. You're going to be CEOs. You know what CEOs need? They need facts. They need a public that has a shared fact base. So this is everybody's business.
So someone asks, at a time when attention spans have seem super short and information fatigue is a real thing, how do we even approach the goal of keeping large parts of the population properly informed?
That is a great and a hard question. Let me push on the attention spans thing. I do think all the time we spend with algorithmically fed short form video media is doing something to our brains. And by the way, I'm a big user too. My son and I trade Instagram reels every single day. So that I'm not saying it doesn't have a purpose, but again, it's a very different purpose. And one of the things we see at the Times that I think is so encouraging is if we do something long that's great and important, millions of people will engage with it. We did an incredible story, investigated story last week about, the guy who was ostensibly one of the founders of Bitcoin. It is long, it is deep. It's by John Carreyrou. He did the Bad Blood book when he was at the Journal. He works for us now. Incredible, long. So worth reading. And we will get so many people to read that. So there is and by the way, people listen to Joe Rogan. How long is his show, right? People have attention spans for long things. The thing that I think is broken is people's understanding of what is actually quality information surfaced in an uncompromised way. The podcast, you asked me about the podcast ecosystem or Substacks, a lot of it's really good. Some of it is what I would say news adjacent, but what's the difference if you go on Ezra Klein's show or Ross Douthat's show? Those guys are going to ask you the hard follow-up question, right? And that's journalism. And I think what the public needs, even more than they need some kind of attention span adjustment, is just more media literacy. Like what is journalism? How is it not like media? How are those things different?
Great. So as a follow-up to that, and several people in our audience want to know, let me back up. So my research often focuses on the changing habits of news consumers, especially at different age levels. Yeah. So how is the Times trying to adjust to what are clearly the changing habits of some of our youngest news consumers? Yeah.
I'm going to say three things really quick. One, not our subscriber base, but our readership is like a third, might even be a little more, like people under, I think, 35. So like we have 50 to 100 million people who come to the Times every week. Giant amount of them are young people. That's the first thing to say. Second thing to say is what have we scaled up in the 1,000% range, probably more than that at this point, showing the work through video. So now, a reporter does an incredible story or a group of reporters, someone goes online and explains, they hold the either highly produced or they do it themselves, and they explain to you what they've just seen. Remarkably, Vance is in Pakistan for to see if they can get a ceasefire. Tyler Pager, who looked like he's a White House reporter, looked like he hadn't slept for, and I don't mean this, like he'd been there, reporting, and he immediately goes online to say, this is what happened here. And it was like the fastest, best way to sort of get that information. So we are working really, really hard to put a lot more of our work into video, because we know that is how lots and lots of people now get their news, huge audience there. And by the way, the more of the work that you see where we show you a human reporter and that reporter describes their process to get the information, the more you trust us. So that's the second way. And then I'm just gonna give you an anecdote. My son is 14. My niece, who's finishing law school, who lives with us, is 24. I'm 55. They like, give me one more year. My mom is 85. All of us play New York Times games, and like and like I was on a plane coming here last night, and this mom with like 2 5-year-olds in front of her, like her kids were acting up, and she was like, "Give me your phone. I'm going to give you a New York Times game." And I was like, that is amazing. So I just, the other things we do, games, The Athletic, et cetera, are appealing in all generations too.
Yeah. So a question that I think will speak to many people in our audience. If we look out over people who are sitting here, many of them are going to be future leaders of different industries, including the media. What are some of the most important lessons you've learned as a leader that you would like to impart to some of our future leaders of our industries?
Yeah. I think I'll say 2 things. One's pretty simple. Leadership is service, and that doesn't get talked about enough. Leadership is about what you can do for other people. And I just like, that's like rule number 1. You have to know that and inhabit that. And I want to be so clear. It's like I'm still on a journey to make sure I'm really inhabiting it that way. But, people are there to work for you, to learn from you, to decide if they're going to trust you, to have you accountable when something goes wrong. And like your first job as a leader is you're there to serve other people, the people who work for you, the people who you're making your products for. And like, it's so easy to forget that when someone wants to interview you on a stage or like gives you a platform to talk, or, you get treated like you're an important person. It's so easy to forget that. So that's the first one. The second one is, and this one is like very personal to me, the thing besides spending 25 years trying to create a sustainable business model for high quality journalism and still working at that and working on something that matters, the thing I'm most personally proud of is like the other people who I've gotten to come along and do it with me. My chief of staff, who got promoted yesterday officially, is our head of partnerships. Rebecca is here. She has a giant job. She just got named to the executive committee of the company. And like every day I'm like, oh my God, like she signs up to do this for the Times and with me. And like, how lucky am I? And what am I doing to make sure she wants to be there and she's having a great experience? And I just like, you will only succeed as a leader, especially the higher you go, if people want to be there and do it with you, like period, hard stop. And people don't talk about that enough.
Great, terrific. So we have time for one more question. And this is something I actually like to close out anytime I'm doing questions, but this comes from the audience. Anytime we have a newspaper conversation, there's so much gloom and doom around the industry. But what are you optimistic about?
I love that. I'm going to try and say this with as few words as possible. The American public, the global public, want to be informed. They want uncompromised information to make their own decisions for themselves, with their communities. Don't ever forget that. And, the work of journalism is in service to that.
Great. Thank you, Meredith.